Welcome to Sculpture Vulture. I'm Lucy Branch, a sculptural conservator and author who is endlessly fascinated by public sculpture. I bring you a series of interviews with sculptors and other fascinating people involved in the field that inspires me, and I hope will do the same for you. You can see the photographs that accompany the episode and the show notes at sculpturevulture.co.uk. Hello, Sculpture Vultures, and thank you for joining me today. I am not going to be doing a very extensive personal update because you have more than enough of me in the last episode. All about me. I think there is much more interesting things to cover. The only thing probably just to say is that I am only going to be dropping one episode this month, so please don't look out for one in a fortnight's time. I know I usually drop every fortnight, but I am selfishly concentrating on my novel. I am basically doing edits and final tidying up bits before it goes off to the beginning of professional edits rounds. And I just want to concentrate on that for the moment, and I am so loving it. And I know that you all know what it feels like to be just right there with a project, and I really feel like I am. And so I will be back in June. In other news, I was just going to mention the Materially Speaking podcast. I don't know if you've come across that. I hope you have, because actually it's a fabulous compliment to Sculpture Vulture. Sarah Monk is the host, and she really specialises in kind of interviews with sculptors in the Pietrasanta. Now, as I am sure all know, that area is really recognised for all of the marble sculpture that comes out of there, and it has got a long history, a fabulous history. Nearly every bit of marble that is most famed, I'm sure, has come from that region. And Sarah has a particular affinity with it. She really knows all of the artists, and so she interviews them on her podcast. So it's, we're bronze, she's kind of marble. They have got a particular event running between the 24th and the 25th of May this year over in Pietrasanta. So if you are over there, you might, on holiday, you might be interested to go and have a look. It's an open studio with the artists that are there. Visitors are encouraged to walk around, chat to the sculptors. And I think Sarah's been really instrumental in trying to bring the voices of the sculptors to front and centre of all the work that's going on there. And even if it's an event that you might not be able to make, I'm sure that Sarah is going to be doing lots of recordings about it, and you may want to have a listen, put it on in the studio, particularly if you're a carver yourself, and I definitely think it would be worth checking out. In the press, I don't know whether you've all been following along Thomas J. Price's activities. I certainly have. He seems to just be a sculptor that is rising in a kind of meteoric way. I mean, he's got the most epic locations where some of his exhibitions have been recently. You possibly have seen that he has been exhibiting in Florence, the Piazza della Signoria and the Museo Novecento and Palazzo Vecchio, all such incredible locations in Florence to have his work, and it being so contemporary and yet classical at the same time. He really has been smashing it out there according to all the reviews, and now is been in Times Square in New York. And his work just seems to fit so perfectly there. But it's so fantastic to see a sculptor getting that kind of recognition, and public sculpture is getting noticed so much. And I've gushed looking at it. He's also got the Man series, which is where he's got these huge screens, which just almost like a takeover of Times Square, and the face is staring and it's like a blinking figure. He's just doing some really incredible stuff. If anyone has a personal connection with him, please can divvy him up. I have asked a few times the studio if he will be interviewed, but he's obviously far too busy, far too important at the moment. But he would be adored by our crowd, and I kind of feel like it would be a real home from home for him. Usually when I look look after sculptors' work, which I do in this case in some of his works in Hackney, they're much more approachable because they feel appreciative that I'm keeping an eye on their work for them and things like that. But in this case, it's all radio silence. So yes, I'm going to ask the sculpture vultures out there, if anyone's got any personal connections with him, come on, tell him to come on the show. So today I am interviewing Nigel Hall, who is one of Britain's most distinguished sculptors. I was really quite nervous about this interview, actually, because he is pretty epic. His outside works are principally made of corten, painted steel, some are bronze, and they're very much concerned with three-dimensional space and mass and line. And he has had an epic, 100 solo shows in his career and over 300 group exhibitions around the world. He has lectured and he's been an external examiner for the Royal College of Art and ran the MA sculpture course at Chelsea College of Art and Design. Many of you may have even been taught by him. He has won many accolades, many awards, including the Jack Goldhill Sculpture Prize. He's a Royal Academician, and he has also an honorary doctorate from the University of Arts London. I really wanted to interview him. I've actually wanted to interview him for a while because I've looked after his work for many years. But then he came to the forefront of my mind because one of his sculptures at Churchill College in Cambridge needed a condition assessment, and the studio brought me in to look at his work because it was moving to another place and they needed some evaluation and advice. And so suddenly I was like, oh yes, he is the perfect person to speak to. And that's often how this podcast works. My little zone working away, and suddenly some brilliant person comes on into my orbit, and I think, yes, you'd love to hear from them as much as I would love to hear from them. So I began our conversation today by asking what stage of life he was at when sculpture became part of the everyday.
I suppose what I would say is that my grandfather was a sculptor. He worked in stone, and he did stone restoration for big buildings, mostly ecclesiastical buildings, but not solely ecclesiastical. But he worked in the West Country for many years. And I sort of was young and interested in his tools and his techniques. So I kind of got interested, I suppose, in sculpture quite early on. My mother went to art school. She did embroidery at the same art school I was at. So visual things were part of our life.
Right.
And pretty much early on, I decided that would be the path for me. And I went to art school in Bristol, the West of England College of Art, in 1960. And it wasn't a question of now, do I do printmaking or painting? I want to do sculpture. So I suppose you could say right from when I left school, I was seriously involved in making sculpture.
Okay, so you weren't tinkering around at home?
Oh, yes. When I was still at school, I was playing around with sculpture. I remember doing some works in molten lead. You know how you get sand, wetish sand, and you can make it pile up into spires. And I was doing that with molten lead and making works that referred to Giacometti. So Giacometti was one of my early heroes, and it influenced me. And yes, making collage pieces in the garden. And yes, early on, but seriously, I suppose, from art school. And it was never in doubt. But there was one moment when I was very interested in the sea and sailing, and there was a time when I thought maybe the sea would be the answer. I might join the Navy, and I came close. I was thinking seriously about that, but thankfully I didn't. It would have been fascinating in many ways, but I think I made the right decision in the end.
Yeah. You're prolific, I think. I mean, you have produced an awful lot of work. Is that something that's quite natural to you? Or do you have to really work at it to produce that amount?
I think it must come naturally, because I don't think I am really.
Oh, really?
I mean, I look at other artists and think I'm a bit slow off the mark. We've just been to Paris for showing some work in Paris, and we went to the Picasso Museum, and that man, I mean, I know nobody could be compared to him, but compared with somebody a lot of artists, I'm a steady worker, and it's partly because I'm happiest when I'm in my studio working. It's a kind of, I wouldn't say it's a sort of comfort zone, but certainly a zone where I feel safest and happiest. And I have a big studio where I hope you'll visit one day in South London. It is big, but I work on my own. I have a team somewhere else in the Midlands who make my metal pieces, but I prefer to work in a solitary way. And yes, I do. I suppose I do produce a lot. I make a lot of drawings. And over the years, the work, I mean, when you think you get to my age, it's a lot of mileage, a lot of time has been spent, and therefore a lot of produce is piled up.
Yeah.
And,
But are you literally losing time when you're in your studio?
I wouldn't say so, because I'm also I work pretty much to a routine. I'm not one of these people that if it's going well, I'll work all night and, sleep all day to make up for it. I tend to stop at a certain time, usually around about 5:36. I start usually around about 10 and work through and stop for lunch, which I have in the studio, take my own lunch in the studio. So it's steady. It's a sort of full working day. But if it's going really well at around 5:30, I think, well, that'll be great. It'll be waiting for me tomorrow and I'll be in a great position, when the work is at a point which has given me excitement, and I'll continue it then. I mean, I have a pretty strict regime, I suppose, in my working life. I don't know. My wife thinks I'm rather over regimented, but that's the way that suits my work.
I quite like structure, and I like to be able to choose what I'm doing within that structure. But on the other hand, I don't know, the parameters of it definitely are good for me.
Because I always think I have a tendency to laziness. Therefore, that sort of meant to me get up and get on.
Yeah.
But I look forward to getting to work. Today has been a day when I've been out and doing other things. But
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to tomorrow, and I've got my plans.
Yeah.
So
You managed an incredibly successful teaching career as well, alongside your kind of studio work. I wondered how you managed to do both of those things.
it was a shortish period. I after the West of England College Grad, I went to the Royal College, and when I graduated, I went to America for 2 years, and therefore I had a bit of help bridging that awkward moment between leaving art school and setting up a studio and finding the funds to continue yourself. So I went to America, went to Los Angeles, and had a studio there, which was funded by the fellowship, and worked very hard, which was extraordinary in a new environment. I traveled a lot as well, because that was also one of the stipulations of the fellowship, was that you should work in America, travel in America, get to know the country. It was a brilliant thing. And I had my first exhibition in America in 1968 in Los Angeles with Nicholas Wilder Gallery, and which was a very well-known gallery at the time. But when I came back in 69, at that time, you could get a day a week in an art school. I don't think it happened anymore. And on a day a week, you could just about survive. And then it was up to 2 days a week, and it meant a bit of traveling. We went to different art schools around the country, and I did that happily for a few years. And then in 1974, a job came up at Chelsea School of Art. Before that, I taught at the Royal College and a few other art schools around the country. But in 74, I applied for a job at Chelsea School of Art running the postgraduate sculpture course. And I talked to John Hoyland. Do you know John Hoyland? Look, he's not with us anymore, but he was a wonderful abstract painter.
His name sounds very familiar, but no, I can't picture his work.
He was a wonderful painter, but he did the equivalent job running postgraduate in painting. And I knew him from America, and he said, take it. It's a wonderful art school, and it won't cramp your style. You'll enjoy the contact with students, and they'll give you time to do your own thing. And that's how it was. I had a studio in the art school. Fred Brill, who was the principal, was incredibly keen that his teaching staff should be active artists, so that was encouraged. We've got time off to travel and do exhibitions wherever they might be. And I had 7 years, 74 to 81. it was hard work.
Yeah.
And it was because the postgraduate course was a 1 year, 4-term course. So it was pretty intensive for the students and for the staff. But we had a tremendous application, good students, and we only had to take, I think, roughly 7 or 8 students a year. So you could pick really good people, have promise. And I loved it. But after about in 81, towards 80, 81, I was showing quite a bit. I had my first show with Gallery Mag in Paris and a few other places. And I seemed to be able to sell a bit of work. And I thought, I'm going to take the plunge, leave this safe job. And literally, that was the last teaching I did in 81, apart from 2 weeks in New York at the New York Studio School, invited by a friend who was the dean there, who sadly just died, Graham Nixon. But yeah, I taught a lot, but I was young and had more energy. But since 81, I've been selfishly working away, and
it sounds like kind of like the right stage of your life to do that, right? You kind of need a bit of funds from somewhere to kind of, maybe pay some boring bills while you're able to kind of get a bit of momentum going. Because even with exhibitions and things, it's not an easy career to get that momentum that you need to sort of get known.
It's true. I mean, the art world is pretty unstable in terms of sales and how one works. And even now, I'm right through. You never know quite, how things are going to pan out for any exhibition. But it's been amazing that I've been able to do what I want to do and survive over the years. So I'm very fortunate.
Do you think exhibitions has been a little bit of a secret sauce for you? Because you seem to have been involved in a lot of exhibitions and obviously solo shows as well. So it has been a good strategy for you.
Well, I suppose I find it necessary to get the work out of the studio and get reaction from people. Yeah. I love putting on shows, despite all the kind of intensity and the sort of stress that they cause, and they do. I just done a show, and the last one was in Paris as a new gallery for me. And, it's a new audience and a new team. And it's you worry that people aren't going to show up for the opening. You're worried that too many will show up and they'll never be able to see the work. You worry that nothing will sell, and it's slow. My work doesn't jump off the walls. It's a slow burn. The sort of work I do, as you can imagine. It's not, figurative work is, I think we all agree, slightly easier to sell.
But also I think there's something about, I don't know, sculpture is harder for people to locate sometimes. A picture on a wall is quite easy to find a home for, maybe, but a piece of sculpture is quite hard. You have to have the right space.
Yeah, and although sculpture was my first love, and I suppose still is, my work is and was and has always been involved two-dimensional. I make drawings, which most people call paintings because they're on a scale of a painting, but they happen to be on paper. Therefore, technically, they are called drawings. But two-dimensional work has been of equal importance to me. Drawings are complete in themselves for me, but refer obviously to the similar sources of sculpture, and they do influence one another. They do inform each other. So I spend my time making drawings for perhaps a few weeks on end, and then I'll want the challenge of sculpture. And because two-dimensionality is and was important, I was drawn to the white wall early on as a support for my sculptural forms. So most of my early work, say through the 70s and 80s and 90s, was wall-based, and much of it still is. So I was always interested, when I was making very linear tubular pieces, in the line and the enclosure and how it was read against a white wall. So a lot of my sculpture, I'm looking at one where I live now, which is a wall piece. It's in wood. It's a couple of interlocking ellipses. It's a relief in the sense that it's based on a wall. Now that has proved quite kind of coincidentally or serendipitously fortunate because people can place my sculpture where they might place a painting. So it's not always something that's going to sit on a base or take floor space. I've been in exhibitions. I remember one in Buffalo, in the museum there, which was called Relief Form. And I never thought of my works as being reliefs, but other people do, and I suppose they are. Mm-hmm. And that, I think, has proved, to put it crudely, quite a helpful financial support, because I enjoy making them, and people can not only enjoy them, but find space for them.
Yeah. Do you spend quite a lot of time thinking about sculpture, not just your own sculpture, like more broadly?
I certainly think about my sculpture. I carry with me, and I got one in front of me now, a little notebook, black covered, and I've been using this sort of format since the 60s, 62, 63. And in my studio, I've got 2 shelves of these notebooks. And in those, I put ideas for sculpture and drawings, lists of exhibitions, ideas for color, and so forth. And therefore, I do think about my work almost continually. It's the last thing I look at in bed at night, and the first thing, pretty much, I pick up in the morning, and I carry with me all day. I look at things in sculptural terms. Looking out of the window, I'm looking at trees moving, and I love that movement of a thing close to you moving against something that's in the middle distance, which in itself is moving slowly against the things in the far distance. I look at the city, and I look at the way verticals come together in the city and horizontals. So in a way, I'm looking at the world sculpturally, but also when I'm still, as 2-dimensional, because I find looking at sculpture a bit like dance. When you're, when things are in movement, when you're in movement, the elements that you're passing through in the world are moving like in a dance. So I suppose sculpture is a continually part of my life. And when I look back at moments in my life, they've been sculpturally significant. Because also, I draw from nature a lot. I don't know whether, not many people know that side of my work. But all my life, I've made drawings of landscape wherever I travel. And funnily enough, I've got a small exhibition at the Royal Academy, which is recently opened, of drawings from the American desert in the 60s and from the Swiss mountains right up to the present, alongside my more known work, the more geometric and colored and charcoal works. They've merged them together, which makes for an interesting conversation between early work, direct visual, the act of looking at the world and making a mark about the world. That always interests me. So, yes, I'm always thinking. And other people's work. Yes, I like looking at other people's work. As you get older, I find there's less and less. This sounds awful. There's more and more in the world that I find fascinating, but less and less in the art world I find fascinating. Mm-hmm. Now, I suppose that's something that would go against me in the sense that one should always be open to new art. Well, I am in the sense that I look at it, but I suppose the longer you live, the more you're occupied with your own work. That is what satisfies and excites you most. It would be a pity if, one were distracted from that to look at other people's work and be more influenced by it. I like looking at my own work and a few other people's work.
Yeah. So really, though, that you're kind of reinterpreting through a kind of sculptural language what you're interacting with or what you're seeing.
Yes.
So that's the same kind of concept that you were fascinated with right when you began your kind of sculptural education, and it's an obsession in some ways. Is that right?
I think it's put quite well. It is an obsession. I mean, when you put my mind back, you ask a question that puts my mind back to my early past. I remember the first time I took a plane flight when I was probably about 14. I flew, I think it was with my grandparents to, I think, Laos or somewhere. And we crossed the channel on a day like today in London. Are you in London?
Yes.
It's a sparkling, clear day with white clouds and a lot of blue sky. And I remember looking out of a plane window, first time I'd flown, and looking down above white clouds, and each one had its shadow on the sea. So there was this linkage between an object hovering in space and its shadow on the surface of the earth. And there were many of these across the expanse of ocean. And I thought, that's sculptural space. And I made sculpture about that. I made my earliest pieces at the Royal College were about landscape, clouds, and I was trying to explode sculpture out of that single object, which sits often on a pedestal or sits on the floor, but it's one object. I wanted to break out of that and become a work made of several items. I made a sculpture of 5 parts. One was a big archway that you could actually walk through. Above it were suspended 2 forms like clouds, and below it on the floor were 2 mats like carpets. So you were covering all the options. You were covering the surface of the earth, like you could walk on the carpet. You were passing through a doorway from one state to another, and above your head were 2 elements that hung in space. So I was just trying to manipulate a bigger mass of space, and that's continued to today in different ways, trying to explore different ways of charging space, either in drawings or in sculpture.
I mean, the thing is that sounds like the most epic sort of task in the world. Like, I mean, I imagine is it a frustrating process? Because that's a hard thing to translate into sculpture, even though you see it so clearly, but then to actually bring it about it's just really difficult.
It's a step at a time, what they say about, a journey of 1,000 miles starts with one step. And people say, what influences you with your work? That's another question which I get often. And it's an interesting question. I often say, what influences me? The previous work.
Yeah.
The last work, you look at it and you think, yeah, but look what else I can do. So you make a modification. And if you looked at one, say, from 5 years ago to one now, there might be quite a big leap. It'll still be recognizable. My work is fairly consistent throughout. But yes, it isn't as difficult as it sounds. And a lot of those early works were quite, I don't know, toy townish sort of feel about them. And I still enjoy The Hill and the Cloud. There was a piece which came about just looking out of a window in the country at a hill that rose up and filled almost the view out of the window. And in the wind, the grasses on the hill would ripple. And over the top of the hill in the sky would come clouds. And that was a 3-dimensional experience for me, which I can still sort of, in a way, hold in my mind, that sort of space, that the moving clouds and the rippling grass and the edge of the hill, that horizon, very kind of strong sensations for me. And those sort of sensations run through like a nerve through a lot of my work. The idea of space which you can walk through and you could choreograph to some extent, and the vertical, I made sculpture that had vertical hanging pieces, hanging like a plumb line, which were metaphors for how we exist on the surface of a globe. We're all pulled to the center of the sphere, as a plumb line is. So I made a lot of sculptures that had that as a metaphor for our experience in space. Yeah.
I was going to ask you just if there's a particular bit in the process that you enjoy most, or whether it's all difficult or all downhill cruising.
No, I'm looking back in my mind to those early hill and cloud pieces, which were made in clay. I love modeling clay. It was a sheer joy and pleasure. Casting it in plaster, that was also a pleasure. often I made them from plaster into fiberglass. That was less of a pleasure. Fiberglass is a nasty, unpleasant material. I then had to change the forms I wanted to create. And with great regret, I put aside the thing I enjoyed, which was clay modeling. And I moved to, in this case, it was welding and brazing of aluminium, which I got to enjoy as an activity. And then that passed on to cutting big sheets to make castings. Now the things I make, I make in wood. They could be quite intricate, but quite engrossing to make, but quite taxing. So it isn't exactly a pleasure. Aspects of it are, I mean, the act of cutting with a jigsaw, electric jigsaw. And when you get good at it, you know, it's a pleasurable, sensuous experience running around a drawn line on a sheet of wood. But overall, I don't know quite when the prime moment would be. There are prime moments. When you first have the concept, that's exciting. When you start to work on it, it gets to be a bit of a chore. Then there's a moment when the thing takes form and it comes close to what you're hoping for. Then it falls apart, not literally, but, you know, it doesn't hold together in the way you hoped it would. And there's a brief moment when the whole piece is finished and you look at it, you think, yeah, that's got something. But then a couple of weeks later, you know, you've gone past that. But it does come back to you. I've just seen a piece in this Clifford Chance exhibition building, which isn't an exhibition, but it's a permanent sculpture they've got there called Desert Rose. And it's a big 2-meter high sculpture. It looks pretty good. And it's set in a big glass wall looking out on the great buildings of Canary Wharf.
Yeah.
Seeing that again today, I thought, yeah, that's
pretty good.
That's quite good. And it comes from, I mean, the Desert Rose comes from a natural rock crystal growth, which you find in the desert. And I've got a few of them around the house, which I like. These were work I made it from at 86 to 91. And they were quite taxing. I cut them with a jigsaw out of bronze sheet, which wasn't, I should have.
That's quite hard work.
It was quite hard work.
Quite hard work.
And I'm stupid I didn't use ear defenders, so it's left me with about tinnitus, which is my stupid fault. But
the amount of things that we all do because we think to ourselves, I'm just going to do it for now. And suddenly you step back and think, oh, no.
Yes, that was foolish, yes.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But I didn't actually realise you made as much yourself as it sounds like you do. I presumed you had a fabricator involved and you had sort of, I mean, obviously you must have a foundry involved for casting the bronze, but equally, you've got quite a lot of different materials that you use.
Yes, all the wood, they're quite sort of intricate and finely wrought because that's under my nature. I like things made beautifully and precisely. Yeah. The wood pieces are quite well put together and people are always astonished that I make them. I've made all of them with the exception of a couple of really large ones, which I wasn't able to do, but I make them all myself.
Wow.
And what I do now is I'm making maquettes of pieces, which are in plywood, and I produce fairly accurate maquette. And if it's something I want to make on a bigger scale, I give my team measurements and plans and the maquette, and they're always making something in either in bronze or corten.
So you're self-taught or?
Technically.
Yeah.
Yes. When it came to these wood pieces, which are they have a skeleton, an inner skeleton, over which is laid birch ply. And I originally thought it would be veneer, and I couldn't find anyone who could do this to my satisfaction. So I gave up veneer and I used a very good quality birch ply. And I taught myself how to cut it, fit it, and I'm rather pleased with them actually. They are beautiful objects in themselves. When I was a student, the technicians were there, but you did all the welding yourself and the cutting. So I've learned the different techniques, which helps when I'm talking to my team, my fabricators. And also, I didn't study engineering, obviously, or anything like that, but when I'm making sculpture, I like the idea of a sculpture that has strength and supports itself. I want it to be a stable object living in a real world, not needing to have to be embedded in the ground in order to stay up. I don't care for that.
Mm.
So I make things that I seem to have an inherent sort of sense of structure and weight and how things sit and hold in space. But I suppose that comes from doing the job as well, rather than just telling them to get on with it.
Yeah. No, I think you should, generally speaking, it's a good policy to not ask other people to do things that you can't do. My middle son quite often says, well, how hard can it be? And I'm like, very hard. That is the answer, very hard.
Yeah, yeah.
But he's 17, so, you think you know everything when you're 17. So I wanted to ask you specifically, you've had a long career. That is it's not an easy thing to sustain interest I think in sculpture, because the problem is that interest ebbs and flows, doesn't it? Have you found that difficult? Have there been times when no one's buying or no one's interested in shows, or have you just managed to keep that going all the time?
It's gone in waves. The fashion of the art world has gone in waves. I remember once gone through conceptual period when you thought nobody would ever show a three-dimensional sculpture ever again. But I have managed to find galleries and collectors who have been supportive over the years. Excuse me. So that hasn't been an insurmountable problem. I've also felt I needed to show my work on a steady basis. So I made sure that I was doing 2 or 3 shows a year, solo shows a year. And that is how it's been.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, there have been fallow periods when it's been hard.
Yeah. Okay, so keeping that relationship going with galleries so that they're helping to put your shows on has been a good strategy for you.
Yes.
Yeah.
And also showing internationally.
Yeah.
I mean, I think if I hadn't shown, if I'd relied upon England, it would have been much more difficult.
Yeah.
Due to the nature of my work. My first show was in Paris in 1967. Next show was in America. A couple of shows over there, one in New York, one in Los Angeles. Came back to Europe. The first one was in Hamburg and Cologne. All I'm really saying is that before I had a show in London, I was showing quite a lot abroad, and that has continued. I have dealers who represent my work in different countries, and I suppose that's evened out the bumps, because a fashion that might be predominant in one place at one time isn't necessarily so, but in another country.
Are exhibitions the main way you're selling?
Yes. Well, that's interesting. I've just completed one, or nearly completed one, which came about in an interesting way, not through a gallery, but through a chance encounter. Somebody came to the house for a lecture, my wife, and they saw a drawing in the hallway. And it was obviously one of mine, and they recognized it. And they said, gosh, what's that doing here? I love this guy's work. And through that, she brought an American to my studio. And he came, and he was very amiable, and he looked at the work that was available. And I thought he didn't seem particularly taken with it, but he wanted to see drawings. And I showed him a big drawing, and I thought, well, nice to have him here, but that's the laughter I'll hear. The next day, I got emails saying that drawing you showed me, it was a large drawing, 5 by 4, 5 foot by 4 foot drawing. And he described it in absolute detail, which rather impressed me. And he bought it. And he said, alongside that, I'd like a sculpture. I live in California, in Sonoma Valley, and I'd like a sculpture to go in the grounds. And between us, we came to the agreement on what the piece should be, what size it should be. He originally said, I think it should be 6 meters high. And I said, that is too big.
It is
for the space. That is too big. And he said, what size do you think it should be? And I said, I think it should be between 3 and 4 meters. And in the end, we decided on 3.5 meters. It was made here by my team. It was just about the biggest piece you could actually send in one chunk of steel. And it arrived, and it's been installed, perfectly installed. He's had a team of professionals to install it. It's painted steel. It's in a sharp yellow in the Californian light. It looks fantastic. Wow. And I bring it up because it was one of those chance encounters that worked perfectly, and the client was honourable, easy to work for, and incredibly enthusiastic, and the results happened. So that was a pleasure. It's not always like that.
It definitely isn't. But on the other hand, that's a marvellous story, especially the fact that he didn't gush the minute that he saw it. He obviously went away and it stayed with him.
Exactly that. It was very rewarding. It was irritating at the time because I'd gone to the trouble of getting it out of a particularly large drawing. And I thought, well, he didn't really look at that, but he described every, a yellow disc a red disc in the top right, black disc in the bottom left, suddenly certain lines. He knew everything and the number of it.
Amazing. It's a good strategy to have multiple streams of income, I find. Yeah. I even though we have certain clients who could really just take all our time, every single booking we have, they're big enough and they've got enough of a collection. But I don't like that because you are far too reliant on one person. And so even though they're very good to us, I try to make sure that there's lots of horses in the stable, if you like, so that when one goes quiet, there's another one running.
Exactly. That's absolutely how I found it.
Yeah, I think it's a safer way to run a business when you've been going a long time anyway.
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, Nigel, it's been such a pleasure to speak to you. Really appreciate it. I hoped you might tell people where they could find out a little bit more about you if they'd like to.
Yes, my website is nigelhallartist.com. I'm on Instagram, I think under the same heading.
And do you like Instagram?
I do. I mean, it's it's the only social media thing I do. And I've been doing it probably for a few years, not very long. But I find it good to get a reaction from people all around the world.
Yes.
And my, I put mostly my own work, to be honest, and occasionally travels. I put up something I've enjoyed seeing on travels, but it's mostly studio and new work and drawings. And it's quite good to get the response of other artists. And I found it absolutely terrific.
Thank you very much, Nigel. I hope to speak to you again soon.
You're very welcome. Thank you very much, Lucy. Bye-bye.
So when Nigel was speaking about space and shape and horizontals and voids, I don't know about you, but my mind was filled with kind of otherworldly shapes, if you like, something like in a science fiction film. It reminded me of like something we might discover if we landed on some distant planet somewhere, like, I don't know, alien sculpture somehow. But I had never felt that about his work when I'd looked at it before, but suddenly it kind of made sense to me in that context. I mean, his shapes are so satisfying. They are really perfect. They're honed and they're substantial and very solid. They make you want to like run your hands all over their bulk, though. As a conservator, I would say that's very bad practice and don't do it. But, his work really invites you to do that, actually. And in a way, they kind of float, even though they're so solid too, because they aren't like earthly things. And I feel like they look like objects that maybe don't have the same gravitational forces, like the same laws as other objects have. Maybe the forces between the shapes have different pulls somehow, but he makes me think about that. And also what he gives us is this refining of the shape. It's like the essence of the shape somehow. And that is his language, this kind of boiling things down to a certain essence. And then he translates the world that he's seeing into that language. I really like the fact that essentially the same idea that captivated him when he was a young artist has nourished him endlessly since then. I mean, his concept of exploring sculptural space and how objects exist in it, it's taken him from sort of flying and seeing clouds cast shadows on the sea all the way up to the current moment. And that is decades of work. There's something very authentic about that single-minded pursuit and how far he's taken it. He's gone down a wormhole, if you like, into his own discovery and found that it just keeps going. And I don't think there's not that many things in the world that can do that for people. And yet even he reflects back on looking at other people's work and things. And he says, actually, I don't find other people's work all that interesting. He's not putting other people's work down in any way. But actually, the more you're in your own work, the more interesting you find your own work. And that's something that I have definitely observed. I mean, at the moment, I'm completely obsessed with my novel. I don't want to think about anything else. But the idea that can actually grow rather than diminish over time, I think is a really tantalizing idea. I love that he's so involved in making his own work. He's incredibly hands-on, practical. He's not just working up a sketch or doing a maquette and then handing it off to someone else and saying, go on, get on with it. He prioritizes the craftsmanship, the manual labor that goes into creating his own works. And he feels like that is very much a part of what makes his work his. And it's not to say that doing it a different way, like involving studios. I know plenty of artists who don't touch the large scale objects that are displayed out. They make something and it is their concept that they really feel is their artwork. It doesn't matter whose hands made it, but that's not the case in this situation. Very much, if you are buying a Nigel Hall, you are buying his touch as well as his concept, and that is really a priority for him. Now, he's consistently exhibited during his career, even from the very early days, and this actually reminded me of Henry Moore and how he launched himself and really gained his momentum. I mean, maybe actually artists exhibiting is not such a wow concept. It has occurred to me that that's not really a wow concept, but actually it really isn't that easy with large objects. And that is a big barrier to entry for many sculptors who are doing large scale works because it's expensive to move the darn things around. It's, sometimes that kind of means that you're not really going to be able to take your work out to exhibit because, it's going to incur a lot of expense and complications and planning and all those things, and it puts people off. And so, nowadays there's websites and there's all sorts of Instagram and all these things, but actually Nigel's success has come from in-person events, and no doubt the more he's done, the more momentum he's gained, the more money he's made, and therefore the more exhibits he's been able to do. But it does make me think that sometimes sculptors who are held back because of the expenses and things like that, actually sometimes it's about leaning into something like a tried and tested way of being discovered, which is to get those pieces out there, wherever out there is. Maybe it's just local to you, but out there, not just staying in the studio and taking photographs, because photographs never do justice to three-dimensional work, and especially not large-scale works. Please support the show by buying one of my books. I have at least 2 very good books, I think, on conservation of sculpture. There is Bronze Behaving Badly, which is a great book if you want to learn more about the rights and wrongs, the principles of conservation around large-scale sculpture, what should and shouldn't be done to sculpture, the way we approach conservation these days. And then there's also Wax On, Wax Off. This is a plea. If anybody has read Wax On, Wax Off, which I know you have because I can see my sales, they're pretty good. but I have no reviews on the book and I really need some. That wouldn't cost you anything. If you have bought the book, please could you review it? Many of you have sent me little snippets saying how much you've enjoyed it. It is all about the conservation of your own sculpture at home. It's definitely more kind of small scale to medium scale to large scale. It's not all about large objects, but it's supposed to be for custodians of their own work who want to look after their own pieces. And I really could do with some reviews. I don't know, usually if a book's been out 6 months, I get a handful of reviews. But in this case, I don't know why. I've had lots of good feedback, but no one has actually written the reviews down and said what they think. So please, can you do that? I would really appreciate it. And I will look forward to speaking to you in another month in June and bringing you another episode.